The day Ethan Cole was born, the entire city celebrated. His father, Richard Cole, was a self-made billionaire, owner of hospitals, tech firms, and charities with his name carved into marble walls. Reporters waited outside the private medical wing, cameras ready to capture the first cry of the heir to a fortune. But the cry never came. Hours later, a doctor quietly told Richard and his wife, Margaret, the truth that shattered their perfect world. Ethan was born completely deaf. No sound. No voices. No lullabies. Margaret wept until she couldn't breathe. Richard stood frozen, staring at the glass window of the nursery. He had built empires from nothing, but this was the one thing money couldn't fix. Specialists were flown in. Tests were repeated. The result never changed. As years passed, the mansion grew quieter, not because of peace, but because of distance. Richard buried himself in work, convincing himself that success would somehow protect his son. Margaret tried her best, but her sadness lingered in every hallway. Ethan grew into a gentle, observant 5-year-old boy. He watched lips carefully, felt vibrations through floors, and smiled even when he didn't understand why others laughed. The staff treated him kindly, but carefully, like something fragile. Among them was Rosa, a middle-aged maid who had worked in the mansion for over a decade. She was invisible to most people. Quiet. Always respectful. But when Rosa looked at Ethan, her eyes softened in a way no one else's did. She noticed things others missed. How Ethan pressed his ear to the piano. How he followed hand movements. How his eyes lit up not at words, but at rhythm. And one ordinary afternoon, Rosa did something that would change everything. One rainy afternoon, Ethan sat alone in the sunroom, tapping his fingers against the glass, watching raindrops race down the window. Rosa was cleaning nearby when she noticed his tapping wasn't random. It followed a pattern. A beat. She paused, heart racing. Slowly, she began tapping back on the table. Ethan froze. Then his face lit up. He smiled, wide and pure, and tapped again. Rosa tapped back. A silent conversation began. From that day on, Rosa started spending her breaks with Ethan. She taught him simple hand movements. Not formal sign language, something deeper. Something instinctive. She guided his hands to feel vibrations from speakers, from drums, from the wooden floor when music played. One evening, Richard walked in unexpectedly and saw Rosa sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ethan, both of them barefoot, palms pressed to a large wooden box as soft music played. Ethan was laughing, really laughing, for the first time Richard had ever seen. What is this? Richard snapped. His voice was sharp, defensive. Rosa stood up immediately, apologizing. She explained gently that she was helping Ethan feel sound through vibration. Richard's face hardened. We have doctors, he said coldly. We don't need experiments. The next day, Rosa was reassigned away from Ethan. No explanation. Just orders. Ethan grew withdrawn again. He stopped smiling. The tapping stopped, but what Richard didn't know was that Rosa carried a secret. One she had never shared because no one had ever asked. Years ago, Rosa had a daughter, born deaf, just like Ethan. And she had spent her entire life learning how to help her child experience the world in ways doctors never taught. Rosa wasn't experimenting. She was remembering, and she wasn't. A week later, a charity gala filled the Cole mansion with powerful guests, crystal glasses, and polite applause. Richard planned to announce a new medical research fund focused on childhood disabilities. Cameras were everywhere. Ethan sat quietly beside his mother, overwhelmed by flashing lights and unfamiliar faces. Rosa watched from the shadows, her heart aching. She knew Ethan felt alone in that crowded room. As a string quartet began to play, Ethan suddenly covered his ears, distressed. The vibrations from the stage rattled through the floor, confusing him. Margaret panicked. Richard signaled for help. Before security could move, Rosa stepped forward. She knelt in front of Ethan and gently placed his hands on her chest, then on the floor. She began tapping a slow, steady rhythm, one Ethan recognized. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed. The room fell silent. Guests watched in confusion as Ethan smiled and tapped back. Rosa then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She handed it to Richard. Inside were drawings, notes, and photos. A lifetime of learning. Her daughter's journey. Methods of communication. Proof that sound wasn't the only way to listen. She never heard my voice, Rosa signed softly, tears in her eyes. But she heard my love. Richard's hands trembled as he looked at Ethan, calm, connected, alive in a way he had never seen before. In that moment, the billionaire realized the truth. He had been trying to fix his son, instead of understanding him. That night, Richard cancelled the gala. The cameras left. The guests went home. But something real finally began inside the Cole mansion. Richard sat on the floor with Ethan for the first time in his life. No phone. No meetings. Just father and son. Rosa guided them quietly, teaching Richard how to communicate without sound, through touch, rhythm, patience. Weeks turned into months. Professional sign language instructors were hired. Music therapists replaced surgeons. The mansion filled with laughter again, not loud, but meaningful. Richard publicly changed his charity fund. Instead of curing deafness, it focused on accessibility, education, and inclusion. Rosa was invited to lead a new program for families with deaf children. She cried when she received the offer, not for the title, but because her daughter's struggle now had purpose. Ethan grew confident. Curious. Proud of who he was. He learned that being deaf didn't mean being broken. It meant experiencing the world differently. One evening, Ethan tapped his father's hand and signed slowly, carefully, "Thank you for listening." Richard broke down, holding his son close. For the first time, he understood a truth no amount of money had ever taught him. Sometimes, the people we overlook carry the wisdom we desperately need. And sometimes, the greatest miracles don't restore what's missing, they reveal what was always there. Kindness doesn't require wealth. Understanding doesn't require perfection. And love doesn't need sound to be heard.